This is a fictional story for reflection and inspiration. All characters and places are made up. If it moves, you share it. Let's keep human stories alive. At exactly 4:17 p.m. each day, Arthur Mallory arrived at West Haven Park. He never missed. Not for rain, not for wind, not even during the February blizzard of '93 that froze the entire lake into white glass. He came with the same deliberate steps, left foot dragging slightly from an old war injury, right hand clutching the polished wooden cane passed down from his father. His coat was always beige, always buttoned up even on warm days, and his scarf, a faded navy one, was tucked neatly beneath the collar. The edges frayed more each year, but he never replaced it. Children grew up watching him. Lovers passed him speculating about his story. Joggers circled him day after day, as if his presence was as reliable as the changing leaves above his head. He would sit on the same bench third from the fountain under the tallest sycamore tree in the park. The bench had a slight curve in its middle worn down by decades of quiet waiting. Some said it was shaped by the grief of a man who sat too long. Others thought it simply bowed to his patience. Arthur never brought a book, never a phone, never a paper. Only a small tin of sunflower seeds he cradled on his lap and occasionally shared with the pigeons, which he'd softly call by name Beaky Softfoot Old Girl. And always at 5:02 p.m. he would glance at his gold pocket watch. Not a second before or after. Then he'd rise, nod to the tree as if saying, "Not today," and begin his slow walk home. No one ever saw him speak to anyone on that bench. Not until June 3rd, 2025. That day began, like any other clouds brushed low over the sky, like they were too tired to hold their shape, and the wind carried the smell of rain, though it hadn't fallen yet. Arthur appeared at 4:17 p.m., his coat trailing lightly behind him, the scarf tugged by the breeze. He reached the bench, paused, and frowned. Someone was already sitting there. A young man, maybe late 20s, maybe younger, wore jeans that didn't quite reach his ankles, and a backpack with a broken zipper. He didn't look up when Arthur approached. He was staring at his hands clenched together between his knees, like he was trying to keep something inside from spilling out. Arthur hesitated, then did something he hadn't done in years. He spoke. "You're in my spot." The young man looked up startled. He had the kind of face that didn't seem to belong in any particular time, eyes too tired for youth, but a mouth still soft from not saying all the things he should have. "I'm sorry," he said, standing quickly. Arthur gestured gently. "Sit. There's room for both of us." The boy sat back down, uncertain. For a few minutes silence returned, familiar and comforting. Then the young man broke it. "You come here often?" Arthur chuckled, a dry sound rare and rusted. "Every day since 1985. The boy nodded slowly, as if unsure whether to be impressed or concerned. Why? Arthur didn't answer at first. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and took out the small tin of sunflower seeds, popping the lid off and holding it between them. "Would you believe me if I said I'm waiting for someone?" The boy paused. "A woman." Arthur smiled faintly. "No, not exactly. Not anymore." They sat together as the sun dipped lower, casting long golden streaks across the ground. The pigeons waddled closer, sensing kindness. Somewhere nearby, a girl laughed, and it echoed through the trees like a memory Arthur hadn't touched in years. "My mom used to come here," the boy said suddenly. "She'd bring me when I was little. We'd sit here, on this bench." Arthur turned surprised. "Here?" "Yeah," the boy nodded. "She died when I was 9. I haven't been back since. Until today." Arthur looked at him more closely, then at the bench, then at the tree. "What made you come back?" The boy shrugged. "I don't know. I woke up and I just needed to." Arthur was quiet, then said softly, "Sometimes the heart brings us back to places before the mind knows why." The wind shifted again, carrying with it the faintest scent of lilacs. At 5:02 p.m., Arthur looked down at his watch. The boy noticed. "Is that when you leave?" Arthur nodded. The boy smiled. "Can I come again tomorrow?" Arthur hesitated, then said, "If you're here at 4:17, I'll save you a spot." The boy stood up and zipped his backpack. "What's your name?" "Arthur." "I'm Jamie." Arthur offered his hand. Jamie shook it. As the boy walked away, Arthur remained on the bench a little longer than usual. He didn't nod to the tree this time. He just looked up into its branches where sunlight flickered like it was remembering something too. That evening, for the first time in 496 days, Arthur's pocket watch ticked past 5:07 before he left the bench. The next afternoon at exactly 4:17 p.m., Arthur Mallory sat down on the third bench under the sycamore tree. The sun was gentler that day, filtering through the leaves in gold and green, casting soft, trembling shadows on the ground. Arthur's scarf flapped quietly with the breeze, and the tin of sunflower seeds rested as always on his lap. He wasn't sure if Jamie would come back, and truth be told, he'd told himself it didn't matter. He'd said the same thing years ago when the letters stopped coming, when the voice on the phone grew weaker, and the world had politely taken one more person from him without asking. But deep down, something shifted since yesterday, like a lock that hadn't clicked for decades now, slightly ajar. At 4:19, he glanced toward the entrance of the park. Nothing. At 4:24, he adjusted the position of the tin. At 4:27, a pigeon landed beside his left shoe. He didn't even greet it. And then at 4:29 p.m., he saw Jamie coming around the fountainhead messier than yesterday, a coffee cup in one hand and something in his eyes that hadn't been there before decision. He walked up quietly and sat beside Arthur without a word. Arthur didn't look at him, just said softly, "You're 12 minutes late." Jamie smirked. "Had to stop at the cafe. Want some?" Arthur looked at the paper cup being offered. "I don't drink coffee." "It's tea," Jamie added quickly. "Chamomile." Arthur took the cup without another word. The first sip was warm, a little too sweet, but comforting in a way he hadn't expected. Jamie leaned back. "So, tell me why you come here every day." Arthur took another sip before answering. "This bench belonged to my son." Jamie turned toward him surprised. "Not legally, of course," Arthur said, "but it was his favorite place in the world. We used to come here every Sunday when he was small. I'd bring a kite. He'd bring questions." Jamie smiled softly. "What kind of questions?" "All of them. Why the sky changes color, why pigeons can't swim, whether trees miss each other when one is cut down." Jamie laughed gently. Arthur continued, his voice steady but distant. "He got sick when he was 10. Real sick. We kept coming to the park for a while, even during treatment. He said the tree made him feel less afraid." Jamie glanced up at the sycamore's towering branches. They shimmered with late afternoon light like veins of gold woven into green. Arthur's voice lowered. "On the day he left us, I came here, sat on this bench. I didn't know what else to do." There was silence again, but it was no longer awkward. It was full. Jamie looked down at his own hands, trembling just slightly, and said, "I didn't know my father. He left when I was 6. Never said why. My mom said not to hate him, but I kind of did anyway. After she passed, I kept wondering if I'd grow up to vanish like him too." Arthur didn't reply. He simply slid the tin of sunflower seeds closer to Jamie. Without a word, Jamie took a few and tossed them to the pigeons who gathered without suspicion. "I always thought people who sat on park benches were just wasting time," Jamie said. "And now," Jamie watched the birds. "Now I think maybe they're doing the only thing that matters." Arthur nodded. "Sometimes sitting still is how we remember how to move forward." Jamie was quiet. Then almost in a whisper he said, "I don't know what I'm doing with my life." Arthur didn't say he should. He didn't say it would get better. He just looked straight ahead and said, "Then sit. Until you do." The wind rustled the leaves above them. For the next 33 minutes they didn't say much. And yet something passed between them, something not loud or obvious, but real. The kind of connection two people don't always need words to feel. At 5:02, Arthur looked at his watch. Jamie noticed. "Leaving." Arthur nodded. "Same time tomorrow." Jamie smiled. 4:17 sharp. Arthur stood slowly, cane tapping the ground. As he turned to go, Jamie called after him. "Arthur." Arthur paused. "I think your son would have liked my mom. She was big on questions, too." Arthur turned, looked Jamie in the eyes, and for the first time in decades let his mouth curve into a smile that didn't belong to memory. "I think you're right. And then he left. That night, Jamie stayed on the bench until the street lamps flickered on and the air turned cold. He didn't know why. He just knew he needed to. As he finally stood to leave, he noticed something carved into the backrest of the bench. Words faint, but still visible beneath decades of wear. "Come back when you forget why you're here." He reached out and brushed his fingers over the etching. He had no idea who wrote it, but it felt like it was meant for him. Jamie arrived at 4:11 p.m. the next day. He wasn't sure why he came early. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe something deeper, a quiet pull that didn't need explanation. He wore the same jeans, a different jacket, and in his hands was a sketchbook he hadn't opened in months. Arthur was already there. Jamie stopped for a second, surprised, watching the older man lean slightly forward, his hands folded gently on his cane, his gaze soft but focused, like he was watching something only he could see. "Thought I'd beat you," Jamie said as he approached. Arthur didn't turn, just said, "Been coming for years, son. You've got some catching up to do." Jamie smiled and sat down beside him. The wind was cool today, tinged with the scent of grass clippings and early summer. The sky was streaked with wisps of white cloud like fading chalk across blue canvas. They sat in silence for a while. Then Jamie pulled the sketchbook onto his lap, letting it rest there like something fragile. Arthur glanced sideways. "You draw?" used to Jamie said. Not since a lot of things." Arthur nodded as if he understood. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't need to. Jamie flipped the pages, slowly, unfinished drawings, smudges, notes to himself he'd forgotten he wrote. And then finally, a blank page. Clean. Waiting. Arthur watched him open a pencil case. Funny, Arthur said, how sometimes it's the smallest things that take the most courage. Jamie didn't reply. He put pencil to paper, and his hand began to move. Slowly at first, then with a rhythm that surprised even him. Lines became curves. Curves became shapes. The page started breathing. Arthur smiled faintly. "Your mother would be proud." Jamie's hand paused. "You think so?" "I didn't know her," Arthur said. "But if she raised you to feel the world enough to draw it, then yes, I think she'd be proud." Jamie blinked, eyes stinging slightly. He didn't expect that answer. They sat for nearly an hour. Jamie kept drawing. Arthur fed the pigeons. At some point, a small girl in a yellow dress wandered too far from her parents and giggled as she chased a leaf across the gravel path. Arthur watched her eyes softening with something that almost looked like peace. "She reminds me of someone," he said. Jamie glanced up. "Your son?" Arthur nodded. He had the same way of laughing, like he wasn't trying to be happy. He just was. Jamie set the pencil down. "Did it ever stop hurting?" Arthur didn't answer right away. He looked at the tree above them, the wind stirring the green into ripples of light. "No," he said, finally. But it changed. The sharpness dulled, became something quieter, something I could live beside instead of inside. Jamie stared at the sketch on his lap. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. A moment captured. The sycamore tree. The bench. Arthur slightly turned toward the birds. "Maybe that's all we can hope for," Jamie murmured. "To live beside the pain." Arthur nodded. "And still make something beautiful from it." At 5:02, Arthur checked his watch. Jamie noticed but didn't say anything. Arthur stood slowly, but he didn't leave right away. Instead, he turned to Jamie. "Would you mind if I told you something about my son?" Jamie shook his head. Arthur sat back down. He wasn't just bright. He was kind, thoughtful, the kind of boy who'd cry if he saw someone being left out, who'd give away his lunch if someone forgot theirs. He had this way of making people feel like they mattered, even if they didn't think they did. Jamie was quiet. "He told me once," Arthur went on, "that he wanted to grow up and fix things. Not machines, people. He said, 'Dad, I think when people feel broken, it's because someone forgot to tell them they're still whole inside.'" Jamie swallowed hard. "Some days I come here and I pretend he's still going to show up running toward me with a grin, arms full of questions." Arthur's voice grew softer. "And some days, like today, I sit here and realize maybe he already has, just not in the way I expected." Jamie's eyes met Arthur's. "I'm not him," Jamie said gently. "I know," Arthur replied, "but you're someone." And sometimes when we think we've come to a place by accident, we're really answering a call we didn't know we heard. Jamie let the words settle in his chest like warm stones in a cold river. As they stood to leave, Arthur placed a hand on Jamie's shoulder. "Come again tomorrow, even if you don't feel like it." "I will." They walked away together that evening, not side by side, but close enough to feel each other's presence. And just as the light dipped low and painted the path in gold, Jamie turned back to glance at the bench. For the first time, it didn't look like just a place where people waited. It looked like a place where people healed. Jamie came early again, 4:06 p.m. This time he brought 2 cups of tea. Arthur wasn't there yet. The bench looked almost smaller without him, just a curve of wood beneath the sycamore, flanked by birds pecking at invisible crumbs and shaded by leaves that caught the light like little stained glass windows. Jamie sat, held the warm cups in both hands, waited. He didn't know why he felt nervous, maybe because he hadn't talked this much in years, maybe because Arthur had made him remember things he'd tried hard to forget. At 4:13, Arthur appeared from the path between the rose hedges, moving with the quiet gravity of someone who'd made peace with slowness. He nodded when he saw Jamie, surprised, but not startled. "You're early again?" Jamie smiled, handing him a cup. "I had the time." Arthur sat down beside him, accepting the tea with a grateful nod. "Chamomile?" he asked. "Peppermint today," Jamie said. Felt like something different. Arthur took a sip. Sometimes that's enough. They sat in silence for a while, as always. But it wasn't awkward. It never was. It was the kind of silence that stretched like a blanket over 2 people who didn't need to fill space with noise to feel understood. Then Jamie said something he hadn't planned to. "I almost left the city last year." Arthur turned slightly. "Why didn't you?" Jamie stared ahead. "I don't know. I packed everything, said goodbye to people who didn't even know they mattered, had a bus ticket in my coat, but the night before, I walked to this park. I hadn't been here in 15 years. I just sat on the swing by the lake, and something in me said stay." Arthur listened without interrupting. That was his gift. He made space for others. Jamie went on. "My life hasn't made much sense lately. I drift between things, jobs, people, places. I always feel like I'm missing something, but I don't know what. Like, there's this version of me I was supposed to become, and I got lost on the way." Arthur nodded slowly. "You ever read a book with pages missing?" Jamie blinked. "Yeah." "And did you still finish it?" Jamie frowned. "I guess, but it's frustrating." "Sure," Arthur said. "But sometimes we don't need every page to know how the story moves. Sometimes we fill in the blanks ourselves. And maybe, just maybe, that's the part where we become who we were meant to be." Jamie was quiet. The breeze stirred again, scattering a few leaves at their feet. Arthur continued. "You know, after my boy passed, I used to dream of who he would have become. I used to see him older, taller, smiling at me with eyes like his mother's." He paused, voice tight for a breath. "But eventually, I realized something painful and beautiful. I was holding on to someone who only ever existed in my imagination. I was grieving a life that never got to unfold, and that's a different kind of grief." Jamie stared at the ground. "I think I'm grieving someone, too." "Who?" "Myself." Arthur didn't laugh, didn't flinch, just said, "That's a hard thing to admit." Jamie nodded. "There are days I wake up and I don't know who I am anymore, or if I ever knew." Arthur sipped his tea. "You're someone who came back to this bench. That's something." Jamie's eyes burned. He hadn't meant to cry, but the tear slipped out anyway. He didn't wipe it. Neither did Arthur mention it. Some moments are too honest to interrupt. "You think people like me ever figure it out?" Jamie asked quietly. Arthur looked at him, eyes kind and steady. "I think people like you carry more questions than answers. And that's okay. Maybe you're not here to figure it out. Maybe you're here to feel it fully, to live it deeply, to sit with the ache and still choose to keep going." Jamie let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "That's a hard way to live." Arthur chuckled. "It's the only way that ever made sense to me." A pigeon fluttered onto the bench's edge, unafraid. Jamie reached into his pocket and scattered a few seeds. "I saw what you carved," Jamie said suddenly, "on the backrest. Arthur raised a brow. Did you come back when you forget why you're here? Arthur smiled softly. That was for me, a long time ago. Jamie looked at him. I think it was for me, too. The sun was beginning to lower, catching the edges of the leaves in a quiet fire of light. The park began to shift, mothers gathering strollers, dogs tugging leashes home, teenagers laughing too loudly on benches not made for memory. But the third bench under the sycamore stood still in the middle of it all. A quiet island, a place that listened. At 5:02 p.m., Arthur looked at his watch. Then he said something different. Will you walk me home today? Jamie blinked. Yeah, sure. They rose together. As they walked down the path, Arthur said, You know we think healing is loud, but sometimes it's just showing up, with tea, and silence, and questions. Jamie smiled. Then maybe I'm healing, a little. Arthur didn't answer. He just nodded toward the horizon where the last of the sun painted the sky in shades of maybe. And as they disappeared from the frame of the park, the wind stirred, gently brushing across the backrest of the old bench. The carving was still there, waiting for the next soul who might forget why they came. That Thursday, Jamie didn't bring tea. He brought a folded piece of paper, worn, yellowed at the edges, folded 3 times over like someone had carried it too long without reading it. Arthur was already there, as always, staring out at the park, as if it were a film he'd seen 1,000 times but never quite finished. Jamie sat beside him without a word. They exchanged a glance, a nod, the quiet agreement of 2 people who had already spoken more in silence than many do in years. For a long time, neither of them touched the paper. Then Jamie said his name was Elijah. Arthur turned, slightly, eyebrows raised, not in surprise, in recognition, as if he knew the name was weight, and Jamie had just chosen to lift it aloud. My first love, Jamie said. He was 3 years older, smarter, braver, more alive than anyone I'd ever met. Arthur said nothing. Jamie stared at the horizon. We met in college. He studied architecture. I studied art. He used to sketch blueprints on napkins and give them to me like they were love letters. A small laugh escaped his throat, fragile. He had this way of walking into a room and making it better without saying a word. And I was a mess. Always was. Still am. But he saw something in me. Drew it out. Arthur finally spoke, voice soft. What happened? Jamie looked down at his hands. Life. Fear. I pulled away. Said I needed to focus on myself. On healing, whatever that meant, at 23. Truth is, I was scared of how much I needed him. I thought needing someone made me weak. He paused. I left without saying goodbye. Wrote him a letter. This letter. He held it up. I never mailed it. I kept it. Every move, every city, every mistake. Arthur leaned back, his cane resting against his knee. You ever see him again? Jamie shook his head. I looked once. Online. Nothing. I don't know where he is now. Or if he's even... The sentence trailed off unfinished. They sat in the quiet of that ache. I used to imagine he hated me, Jamie whispered. Then I started imagining he'd forgotten me. That was worse somehow. Arthur closed his eyes briefly. Sometimes the hardest part of love isn't losing it. It's carrying it alone. Jamie nodded. I don't know what I'd say to him now, even if I could. Arthur glanced at the letter in Jamie's hands. Maybe it's not about saying it to him. Maybe it's about saying it out loud to you. Finally, Jamie unfolded the letter. His hands shook slightly. His voice was uneven, but he read it anyway. Dear Elijah, I don't know how to start this except to say, I'm sorry. I was young and terrified, and I ran when I should have stayed. You were always light to me, and I think I was afraid of casting shadows on you. You were the first person who made me feel seen, and the first I pushed away because of it. I think I'll spend the rest of my life trying to become the kind of man who could have stayed. I don't expect forgiveness. But if some part of you still remembers me, I hope it's a kind part. With everything I couldn't say, then Jamie. By the time he finished, Jamie's eyes were wet. Arthur didn't speak. He just reached into his coat, pulled out a small pack of tissues and handed one over. Jamie took it with a chuckle between tears. "You come prepared," Arthur smiled. "When you get to my age, you learn people don't always cry when you expect them to, but they do cry." Jamie leaned back on the bench, staring up into the tree above them. "I never told anyone about him, not even my mother." "That's a heavy thing to carry," Arthur said. "Yeah," Jamie replied. "But it feels lighter now." They sat for a long while, letting the wind take what it needed. A few pigeons gathered again, as they always did. Routine had its way of continuing even when hearts cracked open. Then Arthur said, "You ever think of writing to him again, not as a letter you don't send, but something more real?" Jamie looked at him. "You think that matters now?" Arthur's eyes didn't leave the sky. "I think nothing is more important than unfinished things we're still brave enough to revisit." Jamie tucked the letter back into his jacket. "Maybe I will," he said quietly. "Not because I expect an answer, but because I'm ready to let go of who I was when I wrote it." Arthur nodded. "That's how we know we're growing." At 5:02 p.m., Arthur checked his watch. But neither of them stood. Instead, Arthur turned to Jamie. "Let me tell you something," he said. "When my wife passed, there were things I never said to her. Regrets that kept me up for years. But one night I sat right here and whispered them into the wind, and for the first time I slept without a stone in my chest." Jamie looked at the breeze that lifted the edges of the trees, the leaves swaying like silent listeners. "You think the wind remembers?" he asked. "I think it carries what we're brave enough to release," Arthur replied. Jamie closed his eyes. For a moment, he felt the warmth of Elijah's hand again, the laugh, the napkin blueprints, the music they danced to without anyone watching. Then he whispered into the air, "Thank you, and I'm sorry." And just like that, the bench under the sycamore became a little more than wood and bolts. It became a confessional, a beginning. Jamie arrived that day without tea, without his sketchbook, without anything but his presence, which had begun to feel like enough. Arthur was already seated as usual, but today he looked different. Not older, not tired, softer. Jamie noticed immediately there was a quiet tension beneath Arthur's posture, like someone about to say something they'd rehearsed for decades but never found the right moment for. "Everything okay?" Jamie asked, sitting down. Arthur nodded slowly, just thinking. "That's dangerous," Jamie joked gently. Arthur chuckled. "At my age, it's the only kind of thrill left." A few pigeons wandered over expectant. Arthur tossed a few seeds from the tin and watched them eat, then said, "Have you ever kept something so long it started to feel like part of your body?" Jamie tilted his head. "Grief?" Arthur smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Guilt?" The word sat between them, heavy but calm, like a river that had always been there, just unnoticed in the dark. "I want to tell you something," Arthur said, "but I've never told it to anyone, not even my wife, not even when she asked." Jamie straightened. He didn't speak, didn't nod, just gave Arthur the quiet space he needed. Arthur took a slow breath. "When my son got sick, I handled it with structure, with control. That's how I survived. Doctor visits, charts, medications. I became the man with a list, because I couldn't bear to feel helpless." He looked down at his hands. They trembled slightly. But toward the end he changed. He became quiet, withdrawn. One day I found him sitting on the kitchen floor, just still, not crying, not speaking, just curled up with his arms around his knees. Jamie's throat tightened. "I told him to get up," Arthur said, voice shaking slightly. "Told him we had an appointment. Told him we were fighting this." He paused. He looked at me, Jamie, and he said, "Dad, maybe it's okay if we just sit today." Arthur swallowed hard. And I said no. I said we don't give up. I dragged him up, helped him dress, took him to the appointment. That night his fever spiked. He was gone by morning. Jamie blinked, stunned. Arthur kept his eyes forward. For years I convinced myself it would have happened anyway. But the truth is, that was his last day, and all he asked for was to sit with me. To just be. Silence fell again, but this time it throbbed. I've sat on this bench every day since Arthur continued, not because I'm waiting for him, but because I owe him that stillness. I owe him the day I never gave. Jamie felt something press into his chest. A mix of sorrow, awe, and the sudden understanding that Arthur's presence here, his patience, his listening, had been more than habit. It had been penance. "You didn't know," Jamie said softly. "I didn't listen," Arthur replied. "And that's what haunts me. Not what I did, what I refused to hear." Jamie was quiet for a moment, then said, "And now," Arthur looked at him, "now I listen to every word someone is brave enough to say. Because I've learned silence isn't empty. It's full of everything we were too afraid to speak." The wind stirred through the tree above them. A leaf broke loose, spiraled down, landed between their shoes like a punctuation mark. "I think he forgave you," Jamie said quietly. Arthur's lip quivered just for a second. "I'm trying to believe that." Jamie placed a hand over the top of Arthur's. It was the first time they'd touched. The old man didn't pull away. They sat like that, two timelines intersecting two men decades apart, both holding on to something that finally felt like it could be let go. Then Arthur said, almost as a whisper, "You remind me of him." Jamie looked over. "Not in the way you speak, or how you look, but in your ache. He had that too, and I spent too long trying to fix it instead of just being beside it." Jamie blinked back the sting in his eyes. "You're not failing me, Arthur." Arthur smiled. "No, this time I'm not." At 5:02 p.m., Arthur didn't check his watch. He didn't need to. He was exactly where he needed to be. And for the first time in 40 years, he whispered into the wind, "I'm sorry, son, and thank you for teaching me how to stay." The wind caught it, lifted it, carried it upward. Jamie watched the sky, and for a moment the clouds shifted just enough to let a sliver of sunlight fall directly onto the bench beneath the sycamore. And maybe that was an answer. Jamie didn't show up at 4:17 that day. Arthur noticed. He stayed until 5:12, a full 10 minutes past his usual time. He tossed seeds, watched the light shift across the gravel, counted the joggers and pigeons, and the little boy who always dropped his juice box near the third bench. But no Jamie. And so Arthur walked home, slowly, a little heavier than usual. The next day, Jamie came back. He didn't say hello. He didn't sit right away. He stood in front of the bench like it was something holy he wasn't sure he deserved to touch. Arthur looked up. "Missed you yesterday." Jamie gave a short laugh, tired sharp. "I almost left again." Arthur waited. Jamie sat. His movements were slower, shoulders sunken, skin pale like he hadn't slept. "There's this gallery in town," Jamie began. "They were reviewing portfolios for new artists. Someone I used to know recommended me, said they remembered my old work and thought I should try." Arthur nodded gently. Jamie continued, "I sent in my pieces, sketches, paintings, a few personal ones, things I thought maybe had meaning." Arthur didn't interrupt. "They emailed me back yesterday," Jamie said. "Said I didn't make the cut. Too introspective, too quiet, not bold enough." He gave a hollow smile. "Basically, I was forgettable." Arthur leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "I told myself I didn't care," Jamie went on, "but I packed a bag, started looking at train tickets. I was ready to vanish again." He ran his hand through his hair. "But then I saw something," he said. "Or someone." Arthur looked at him. There was a woman on the edge of the playground, just sitting. Her face was red eyes, swollen. Looked like she was trying to hide it, but it was all over her. That kind of grief that doesn't care who sees. Arthur waited. Jamie swallowed. "I wanted to keep walking, I really did. But something pulled me. Something you said once, about sitting beside pain instead of fixing it." Arthur didn't smile, didn't speak. Jamie continued. "So I sat on the bench beside hers, not this one. A smaller one by the swing set. Didn't say anything. Just sat." He paused, remembering. "She didn't look at me for a while. Then finally she said, 'My son won't talk to me. It's been 2 years. And then she cried, right there, in the open." Arthur's eyes softened. Jamie's voice was quiet now. "I didn't give advice. Didn't say it would be okay. I just said, 'Do you want to sit here for a while? I'm not going anywhere.'" Arthur nodded slowly. "And did she?" Jamie nodded. "Yeah, for almost an hour. We didn't say much after that, but when she left she said, 'Thank you for letting me be seen.'" Silence folded around them like warm cloth. Jamie looked at his hands. I still feel like a failure. Like I'm never going to be what I thought I'd be. Arthur responded gently. Most of us aren't. Jamie looked up surprised. Arthur continued. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe we're not here to become what we imagined, but to be what others need in a moment they never imagined. Jamie's eyes stung. So what now? Arthur tapped his cane lightly on the gravel. Now you stay, even when it hurts. Especially then. Jamie looked at the old sycamore. The way its roots curled like arms into the soil. The way its leaves trembled not from fear, but from being alive. You ever wonder, Jamie said, how many people pass this bench thinking they were alone? Arthur smiled. That's the thing about benches. They're always waiting for someone who needs them. Jamie leaned back. He closed his eyes for a moment. Let the wind pass across his face. Let the rejection settle not as a failure, but as part of the soil he was growing from. And then slowly, quietly, he reached into his bag and pulled out a pencil. No sketchbook this time. Just the back of an envelope, a scrap. Enough. He began to draw the woman's eyes. Her hair tied too tightly. Her shoulders pulled in like she was trying to disappear into herself. And beside her himself. Not heroic. Not special. Just present. Arthur didn't look. Didn't need to. He knew Jamie was writing a kind of letter in lines and curves, one that said, I was here. I stayed. And somewhere in the distance, a mother looked up from her coffee. A man paused before tossing his cup. A child asked a question that made a stranger laugh. And the bench under the sycamore, it listened. As always, 4:17 p.m. Jamie arrived on time. No tea, no sketchbook. Just a quiet expectation and the memory of yesterday still warming his chest. But the bench was empty. Not just unoccupied. Empty. The kind of empty that hummed. That rang in your ears like silence wasn't absence, but something too loud to ignore. Arthur wasn't there. Jamie blinked, looked around the path. Maybe he was late. Maybe today the bus ran slower. Maybe the cane had slipped, or the jacket took longer to find. He waited. 4:23. Still no Arthur. Jamie sat down slowly, heart beginning to pulse faster than it should. He looked at the path again. At the playground. At the gravel Arthur usually scattered seeds across. Nothing. The tin of sunflower seeds wasn't there either. And that's when Jamie knew. Not knew in the logical sense, not with confirmation, but the way we know when a door we never wanted to close does. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, staring at the ground. The bench felt wrong without Arthur beside him, like a piano missing a key, like a sentence that trails off before it's ready. He stayed until 5:02, but this time there was no one to check the watch. The next day, Jamie returned, earlier this time, 4:00 sharp. Still empty, still quiet, but this time something had changed. At the center of the bench, neatly placed as if left with care, was the tin of sunflower seeds. Jamie stared at it. His hands trembled when he picked it up. The metal was cool, familiar, like Arthur himself had handed it over in silence. He opened the lid. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Not aged, not weathered, fresh, like someone had written it not long ago. Jamie unfolded it with care. It read, Jamie. If you're reading this, I didn't make it to the bench today. Maybe I'm sick. Maybe I just needed a day off. Or maybe if life had its way, it's time I let the bench belong to someone else. I want to say this clearly. I didn't sit here all those years waiting for my son to come back. I sat because I believed healing happens quietly when we return to places where love used to live. You brought love back to this bench. You listened. You stayed. You reminded me what it feels like to matter again. So if I don't return, I want you to know I didn't leave you empty. I left you this bench, and you'll know what to do with it. Feed the birds. Watch the sky. Be still when someone sits beside you. And if you ever forget why you came, just stay anyway. That's where the answers always begin. Arthur. Jamie read the letter twice, then a third time. By the end, his eyes were full. He didn't cry loudly. There was no shaking, no collapse. Just a long, slow breath, and the quiet ache of saying goodbye without hearing it. He placed the letter gently into his coat pocket. Then almost reverently he set the tin back on his lap and waited. That evening, a young man with a tear-streaked face approached the bench. Jamie looked up. The man hesitated. He was holding a phone, face pale, hands shaking. Is this seat taken?" the stranger asked. Jamie moved, slightly patted the wood beside him. "Not at all." The man sat down, still tense. Jamie offered him a handful of sunflower seeds. The stranger looked confused. Jamie shrugged, smiling faintly. "For the birds, or your hands, whatever needs the calming first." They sat quietly for a few minutes. Then the man said, "My dad died this morning." Jamie didn't flinch. He didn't give advice, or platitudes, or stories. He just said, "Then this is a good place to sit." And they did. Together. The third bench beneath the sycamore tree wasn't empty anymore. It had changed hands, but it had never lost its purpose. It was strange how quickly the bench found its rhythm again. Or maybe it had never really lost it. Jamie began arriving early, 3:50, sometimes earlier. He brought tea again, 2 cups even though he usually drank both. It just felt right. He left Arthur's tin open beside him, seeds ready. And slowly the people began to sit. Not many, not at once, but always just enough. The first was a man in a suit with tear stains drying beneath his eyes. He didn't speak for 15 minutes, then finally whispered, "I just got divorced. I signed the paper in a coffee shop bathroom." Jamie didn't respond, just reached over and gently slid the tin of seeds toward him. The man took a handful, sat in silence, then whispered, "Thank you," and left. The next was a woman with 2 children pulling at her sleeves. She looked exhausted, beyond words. She sat down for only 5 minutes, just long enough to breathe, to close her eyes, to not be needed. Jamie didn't ask her name, didn't need to. When she rose, she said, "I forgot what quiet felt like." Jamie smiled. "Come back any time." She nodded and walked away. It became a ritual. Jamie didn't try to be Arthur, but without realizing it, he was slowly becoming the stillness Arthur had taught him to offer. Sometimes he'd sketch quietly while people cried beside him. Sometimes he'd nod when they confessed mistakes they hadn't said aloud in decades. And sometimes people didn't speak at all. But the bench held it all, and Jamie let it. One morning, Jamie returned to the bench to find something unexpected. A small envelope tucked beneath the wood slats, carefully wedged as if someone wanted it found, but only by the right person. He opened it slowly. Inside was a photograph, black and white, old, Arthur, younger, maybe 40, standing beside a smiling boy no older than 10. They were holding a model airplane. The trees in the background looked strangely familiar. On the back in soft handwriting, "To whoever still remembers. This was taken just before the cough started. That summer, we built something together. Thank you for sitting with him when I no longer could. M." Jamie stared at it for a long time. He ran a finger over the image. Arthur's face, same smile, same gentle strength, and the boy-eye's bright arm wrapped tight around his father's waist. There was a grief in this photo, but also love. Deep, unspoken, eternal. Jamie folded the photo carefully and slid it into his coat pocket beside Arthur's letter. That afternoon, a young girl approached the bench. She couldn't have been more than 17. She looked lost, eyes, red sleeves pulled low. She sat down slowly, hesitantly, like testing water that might be too cold. Jamie waited. After a few minutes, she whispered, "I don't think I want to go home today." Jamie didn't look at her. He just nodded slightly. "Then sit here for a while." She cried, quietly. Then she asked, "Do you come here often?" Jamie smiled. "Every day," he said. "Someone once saved me by letting me sit in silence." The girl looked at him. "Is it always this quiet?" "Not always," Jamie replied. "Sometimes it hums with people's stories, and sometimes it just listens." The girl wiped her nose. "I didn't think anyone would care if I disappeared." Jamie looked at the sky, then at the tree, then at her. "I would," he said. "Even if we just met, I would." And she nodded, just once, but that was enough. She stayed for almost an hour. When she left, she said, "Maybe I'll come back tomorrow." Jamie replied. "This bench never forgets who sat on it. You'll always be welcome." That night, Jamie walked home slower than usual. In his pocket, he now carried two things: a letter from Arthur and a photo from someone who still remembered. He stopped halfway across the park, looked back. The bench beneath the sycamore stood alone in the dimming light. And yet it wasn't alone. It held every voice, every silence, every goodbye, and almost and maybe. It was fuller than ever. Jamie smiled to himself. He had once believed healing was a solo journey. Now he knew healing was a bench, and a stranger who stayed. It was a Sunday. A warm one. Breezy. The kind of afternoon where shadows played gently across the grass and time seemed in no hurry to pass. Jamie had brought his sketchbook today, not to draw, just to have it. Like a blanket, like a piece of armor he no longer needed but wasn't ready to leave behind. He arrived early. The bench waited quiet as ever. He sat, sipped his tea, scattered a few seeds. For 20 minutes no one joined him, and Jamie didn't mind, until he felt the bench shift slightly. Someone had sat down. Jamie turned his head casually, and then froze. It took a second to process. The hair was shorter, the jaw sharper. A few lines now traced beneath the eyes, but the presence, that undeniable stillness wrapped in quiet gravity, hadn't changed. Elijah Jamie's voice cracked like old paint. The man looked at him slowly, cautiously. "I wasn't sure it was you." Jamie's mouth opened, then closed. He couldn't breathe. Elijah gave a small, apologetic smile. "I almost walked away. Twice." Jamie shook his head. "I what? How?" Elijah looked around the park. "I moved back last month. Temporarily. I was walking through here a few days ago and saw the sunflower seeds. Thought it might be you." Jamie laughed, stunned. "The seeds?" Elijah nodded. "You used to draw birds obsessively. I never forgot." The wind moved through the leaves as if holding its breath. Jamie swallowed. "I wrote you a letter once, after I left." Elijah nodded slowly. "I never got it, but I think I heard it anyway." They sat there, neither sure what to say next. Jamie looked down at his shoes. "I'm sorry, that's not enough, but it's all I carried for so long." Elijah didn't respond right away. "Then, do you know what I remember most?" Jamie shook his head. "Your laugh," Elijah said. "Not the loud one. The one you only made when you were completely unguarded. It was rare. But when it happened, it felt like being let into a sacred room." Jamie's eyes burned. He blinked fast. Elijah looked down at the bench. "I was angry for a while. Then sad. Then nothing. That was the worst part. When your name stopped hurting." Jamie exhaled shakily. "I deserved all of it." "I know," Elijah said softly. More silence. Then Elijah added, "But I think you became someone beautiful anyway." Jamie laughed through his tears. "Arthur said I reminded him of someone he lost. Maybe he was just trying to tell me I wasn't lost anymore." Elijah turned to him. "Who's Arthur?" Jamie smiled sadly. "A man who taught me how to stay, even when it hurts." Elijah looked away for a moment. "I didn't come here to reopen things. I didn't know you'd still be you, still sitting." "I almost wasn't," Jamie admitted. "But this bench, it became something else. It gave me back parts of myself I thought were gone forever." Elijah nodded slowly. "Maybe I came to leave something behind, too." Jamie looked at him. "Do you want to talk?" he asked. Elijah shook his head gently. "Not today. But maybe. Can I sit here tomorrow?" Jamie smiled. "This bench never forgets who sat on it," he said. "You're always welcome." They sat a little longer. Not as lovers. Not as ghosts. Just two people. With shared silence, shared ache. And the possibility of something else, not a return but a recognition. At 5:03, Elijah stood. He placed a small pebble on the bench's edge before leaving a quiet ritual, in some cultures a symbol of "I was here and I remember." Jamie didn't move. Didn't cry. He just placed his hand over the pebble and whispered, "Thank you for coming back." The next day, Elijah came back. He didn't speak at first, just sat beside Jamie like it was the most natural thing in the world. Jamie passed him the tin of seeds. Elijah took one, rolled it between his fingers. "You're still feeding the birds," Jamie nodded. "I like the way they show up, unafraid, hungry, and gone when they need to be." Elijah smiled faintly, like people. They sat in the warm silence that comes not from comfort, but from having been broken by the same things and choosing not to hide the pieces. After a while, Elijah asked, "Do you still draw?" Jamie opened his sketchbook. Elijah leaned over to look. There were people not posed, not polished, just real. A mother with her head in her hands, a boy feeding crumbs to pigeons, a man curled forward with a letter in his lap, the girl from a few days ago sitting on the edge of herself. Elijah paused at one drawing, a man and a boy holding a model airplane beneath a tree. He pointed. "That one? Who are they?" Jamie smiled, quiet and heavy. "Arthur and his son." Elijah looked at him. Jamie added, "I never met the boy, but I think I sat in his memory long enough to understand what it felt like." They didn't speak after that. They didn't need to. Later that week, something unusual happened. Jamie arrived to find someone already sitting at the bench. A man, middle-aged, tall, wiry, wearing a long brown coat and holding a box wrapped in cloth. When Jamie approached, the man looked up. "You're the one who sits here every day, right?" Jamie nodded slowly. The man stood. "I was told to find you." Jamie blinked. "By who?" "Someone named Martha," the man said. "Arthur's daughter." Jamie froze. The man held out the box. "She found this when cleaning out his apartment. Said it should go to the person who understood why Arthur never stopped coming here." Jamie took the box gently. It was small, wooden, old but clean. He ran his thumb across the surface. The lock had no key, just a clasp. The man gave a half smile. "She said her father stopped talking after her brother died. Never explained why he came here, until one day he told her, 'I sit because that's where my silence was finally accepted.'" Jamie felt the wind shift. He nodded, holding the box tighter. The man left with a polite nod. Jamie sat down slowly, heart pounding. He opened the box. Inside was a bundle of folded paper, dozens of them, letters, all addressed. "Dear Daniel." Jamie picked one at random. It was dated 1984. He began to read. "I saw a boy today who reminded me of you. He had your eyes, that tilt in his head when he's unsure of something. It knocked the wind out of me. I wanted to walk over, ask him if he needed help with his math homework. Instead, I sat on the bench and let myself ache." He picked another. "I didn't cry today. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I remembered the way you used to hug me when I held back tears. You hated it, but you always did it anyway. I'm learning to let people sit beside me, like you used to." Jamie closed the box. His chest hurt, but not from pain, from recognition. This was what Arthur had carried. This was how he survived, not by forgetting, but by writing into the silence. Jamie placed the box beside him. That afternoon, Elijah arrived. Jamie didn't speak, just handed him one of the letters. Elijah read in silence, and for the first time in years, Jamie saw tears gather at the corners of his eyes. "You're not just holding memories here," Elijah whispered. "You're holding the world together." Jamie looked at him. "No," he said softly. "I'm just learning to sit with it finally." That night, Jamie took the box home. He laid out the letters gently, like old photographs. He didn't read them all, not yet, but he would, slowly, one by one, like prayers. Because that's what they were. And now they belonged not only to a grieving father, but to the bench, to the tree, to everyone who came looking for something they couldn't name. And Jamie, he was the keeper now. Not of answers, but of space. The bench was quiet that day. No one joined Jamie. No birds, no strangers, no Elijah. Just the sycamore, and the wooden box with Arthur's letters, and the wind soft and unassuming like a breath that had forgotten it was still holding grief. Jamie sat with a thermos in hand, one hand resting lightly on the box beside him. He didn't draw, didn't open a letter. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out a notebook. Blank, the first page crisp and untouched. And then slowly he began to write. "Dear me at 23. I've tried to forget you for years. You were always the version of me I was most ashamed of. The one who ran. The one who chose silence when love asked you to speak. The one who left Elijah standing in that kitchen trying not to cry in front of someone who'd already decided to disappear. But I think I understand you now. You were afraid. You thought love meant performance. You thought pain made you unworthy. You thought the ache inside you had to be hidden even from the person who loved you most. And when it cracked open, you ran. Because no one ever told you that breaking doesn't mean you're broken. I don't forgive you yet. That'll take time. But I no longer hate you. You were just trying to survive with tools you didn't know how to use. I want to tell you what happened after you left. You wandered. Cities, hostels, blank notebooks filled with half-finished drawings. You became a ghost in your own life. Until one day you sat down on a bench beneath a sycamore tree. And there was an old man who didn't try to fix you, didn't ask questions, didn't tell you to move on. He just let you sit. He taught you how to listen, not just to others, but to yourself. And slowly something came back to life. Your hands remembered how to hold gently. Your eyes softened. Your chest stopped bracing for the world to hurt you again. You still ache, by the way. Some days it presses against your ribs like old music. But now, you don't run. You stay, you sit, you let people be seen, you let love walk beside you even if it never says a word. Elijah came back, not to heal the past, just to share the present. You shared silence, and that was enough. You became the bench, not the tree, not the bird, not the rescuer, just the place someone can rest without pretending. So to you, my frightened younger self, I don't want to erase you anymore. Because without your cowardice, I wouldn't have searched for courage. Without your silence, I wouldn't have learned the beauty of listening. Without your leaving, I wouldn't have understood what it means to stay. One day you'll sit beside a stranger and say nothing, and they'll cry in your quiet, and it will be the most honest thing either of you have ever known. Until then, just breathe. It's okay to not know who you are yet. Just don't disappear completely, because we're waiting for you beneath the sycamore. Love you. At 36. Jamie closed the notebook. He didn't fold the page. He left it open, let the wind lift the corner like it was curious. He placed it gently into Arthur's box among the letters written to a lost son, now joined by one written to a lost self. That evening Elijah came. Jamie didn't say a word. He simply opened the box, let him see the letter, and handed him the tin of seeds. They sat until the shadows stretched long across the grass. Then Elijah asked who was the letter for. Jamie answered softly, the boy I used to be. Elijah nodded. Then I hope he reads it one day. Jamie looked at him, smiled faintly. I think he already did. Jamie noticed him from a distance. Small, skinny. Hoodie pulled too far over his face for a summer afternoon. His shoes looked too big for his feet, the kind that were either second-hand or meant for a boy who no longer lived in that house. He walked slowly, not cautiously, just heavy, like the world sat uneven on his shoulders. And the backpack. It was frayed at one strap, the zipper half broken. It bounced loosely behind him as if barely holding on. Jamie didn't speak, just watched. The boy passed the bench once, then again. On the third pass, he stopped. He didn't ask to sit. He just sat, far on the edge, as if afraid the bench might reject him too. Jamie offered a small nod. Nothing more. The boy glanced at the tin of sunflower seeds, but didn't take one. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then a whisper. I ran away yesterday. Jamie didn't turn to look. He kept his eyes forward. The boy continued, voice thin. No one's called the cops yet, so I guess they haven't noticed. Jamie let that land, like soft dust on stone. I left a note, the boy added. Said I'd be back when I mattered. Jamie finally turned his head, met the boy's eyes barely visible under the hoodie. He didn't ask questions, didn't give advice, just reached into his bag and handed the boy a granola bar. The boy took it, looked at it, then slowly began to eat. They sat that way for a while. Birds came and went. A woman jogged by and waved at Jamie. The air began to thicken with the golden hour of evening. Then the boy said, You live here. Jamie smiled. Not quite. But the bench and I are old friends. The boy nodded. My name's Milo, he said. Jamie extended his hand gently. I'm Jamie. They shook like equals. Milo shifted slightly, pulled his feet up onto the bench, hugging his knees. Jamie asked softly, Want to tell me why you left? Milo hesitated. Then I don't think they like the version of me that's quiet. Jamie blinked. That hit deeper than it should have. They want me to speak more, play more, be like my brother. He's loud. Everyone loves loud. Jamie exhaled. Quiet doesn't mean invisible, he said. Milo looked at him sharply, like no one had ever told him that. Jamie added, You ever seen birds scatter when someone shouts? Milo nodded. Well, I think the world needs a few more people who know how to sit still. Milo was silent for a moment. Then, with a hint of defiance, I think I hate people. Jamie smiled. That's okay. Some people are hard to love, especially when they don't know how to love others well. Milo looked at his broken backpack. I didn't steal anything, he said suddenly. I believe you. Milo looked surprised. I didn't even pack a change of clothes, he admitted. Jamie nodded. You don't have to figure everything out today. Milo's eyes darted. What if I don't want to go back? Jamie leaned back, eyes on the sky. Then for now, you just stay here. Just for today. No decisions, no expectations, just one place where you don't have to be anything but breathing. Milo's lip trembled. He hid it quickly behind his knees. But Jamie saw. As the sun dipped lower, Milo asked, Who sat here before me? Jamie thought. A man who lost his son, he said. A woman who didn't know how to forgive herself. A teenager who forgot she mattered. A man who ran away and finally came back. Milo looked at him. You were the one who ran. Jamie nodded. And this is the place that made me stay. Milo unzipped his backpack, pulled out a crumpled piece of lined paper. He held it out. Jamie hesitated, then unfolded it. A single line, I am not enough. Jamie folded it back, placed it gently in the wooden box beside him where Arthur's letters were. Can I do that? Milo asked Small. You already did. They didn't speak again. But as they sat there, one grown man and one boy who had no map, the bench stretched wider. Not in wood. In welcome. When Milo left, he didn't say goodbye. He just took the granola wrapper, tucked it into his pocket, and walked toward the far side of the park. But he left the broken backpack on the bench. Jamie held it in his hands for a long time. He would keep it safe, for as long as it took. 3 days passed. No sign of Milo. Jamie came to the bench every afternoon like always, thermos, sketchbook, Arthur's wooden box, and now a broken gray backpack. He placed it beside him each day like an empty seat held open for someone who hadn't yet decided if they deserved to come back. Each time a boy walked by, Jamie's heart leapt. But it was never him. On the 4th day, just before sunset, Jamie finally unzipped the backpack. Not to search, just to see. Inside, it was almost empty, except for a worn-out pencil case, a t-shirt size small, crumpled, and smelling faintly of smoke, and an envelope, white, unsealed, folded. Jamie pulled it out with slow, careful hands. No name written outside. But something about it felt intentional. He opened it. Inside a small sheet of notebook paper torn unevenly from a spiral-bound pad, written in blue pen with misspelled words and uneven lines. Hi, Jamie. You didn't tell me what to do. You didn't say go home or fix yourself. You just gave me a bar and let me be quiet. I never told you, but I wasn't going to come back at all. I was going to walk into the river behind the train station that night. But then you said quiet people matter too. No one ever said that to me. You saved me without even trying. That's the kind I trust. I'm staying with a cousin now. She makes gross tea and listens weird, but it's better than before. Keep my backpack a while. It's the only thing that ever stayed with me for more than one day. I'll come back when I believe I belong. Thank you for being the bench. Milo. Jamie read the letter once, then again. The 3rd time he couldn't finish it. He folded forward shoulders, shaking hands, gripping the paper. And for the first time since Arthur died, Jamie cried fully. Not the quiet, measured kind he'd learned to hold in public. This was something else. A release, a prayer, a knowing. He cried for Milo, for Arthur, for himself, for all the versions of people who sat quietly and waited to be seen. And when he finally sat back up, tears drying on his cheeks, he placed the letter in the wooden box right next to his own letter from Part 12. Then he looked at the backpack beside him. He didn't zip it up. He just placed it gently at the far end of the bench like a placeholder. A promise. A way of saying you were here and you still belong. That evening, Elijah arrived. He saw Jamie's face, said nothing. Just sat. Jamie handed him the letter. Elijah read it slowly. When he finished, he whispered, "You did it." Jamie shook his head. "I didn't save him," he said. "I just didn't leave." The next morning, Jamie came early. Before the sun, before the birds, before the world asked him to be anything but still. He placed the backpack down, this time with care and respect, then opened his sketchbook and began drawing it, not as something broken, but as something carried, because that's what healing is. Not erasing where we've been, but honoring the things we once had to carry alone, until someone said, "Set it here. I'll keep watch." It was a morning unlike the others, not because of the sky still gray soft, holding the hush of early light, not because of the wind still moving slow, carrying the smell of summer grass and worn wood, but because Jamie woke up knowing today would be the last day he'd sit on the bench. Not forever. But for now, it wasn't sadness that told him it was peace, a kind of knowing that didn't require permission. He arrived just after 6 a.m., the park still empty, the bench still waiting. He placed Arthur's wooden box down gently, opened it. Inside were letters from a father to a son, from a boy to himself, from Milo to the only person who saw him. Jamie added one more, a short one, just a folded slip of paper that read, "For whoever sits here next, this space has held silence, loss, healing, and hope. You don't have to fix anyone. Just stay long enough for them to feel safe enough to speak. That's more than enough." Jamie. He placed the note on top, then closed the box. He tied a small ribbon around the handle, not as a decoration, but as an invitation. Then he turned and looked one last time at the bench, the crack on the left slat, the carved initials no one could read anymore, the worn spot from where his thermos always rested. It was no longer just a bench. It was a story. As he began to walk away, he heard footsteps behind him. Soft. Hesitant. He turned. It was Milo. Still small. Still quiet. But standing straighter, his hoodie was gone. His shoes were new, but the look in his eyes still Milo, still wondering if the world had a place for him. Jamie smiled. "You came back." Milo shrugged. "I wanted to see if it was still here." "It always will be," Jamie said. Milo looked at the bench, then back at Jamie. "Are you leaving?" Jamie nodded, for a while. Milo kicked the dirt gently. "So who will sit now?" Jamie looked him gently in the eye. "You will, if you want to." Milo blinked. "Me, you've been the boy who ran," Jamie said softly. "You know what it feels like to not be okay. That means you know exactly how to hold space for someone else who's still learning how to stay." Milo didn't respond, but he walked to the bench, sat, placed his hands on the wooden box like it was sacred. Jamie watched, heart full, not from pride, not from sadness, but from completion. Milo looked up at him one last time. "Will you come back someday?" Jamie nodded. "When it's my turn to sit again." They didn't say goodbye. They didn't need to. That afternoon, Elijah met Jamie near the edge of the park. They walked together, no bench, no box, no burden. Just two men who had once lost each other and found themselves again. Not in a grand reunion, but in the quiet consistency of staying. Elijah reached out, took Jamie's hand gently. "I'm glad you stood up," he said. Jamie smiled. "I had to. There was someone else who needed the seat more." Weeks passed. The park changed like it always did. Leaves grew, birds returned, the air shifted toward autumn. But the bench remained, and every so often someone new sat down, and next to them a boy with quiet eyes and a gentle nod would pass them a granola bar or a sketchbook or say nothing at all. And they'd stay, for a minute, for an hour, for as long as it took, because now Milo was the one who stayed. And somewhere far off, Jamie sketched a park from memory, with a tree, a bench, and a ribbon fluttering like breath. "Thank you for sitting with the bench under the sycamore tree. If it touched your heart, Share it with someone who's been quietly holding pain too long. Sometimes we don't need someone to speak, we just need them to stay. If you're still healing, this story is for you.